little about the difference between a dog who's aggressive. For example, I've known a number of particularly Chihuahuas that people never practically seem to put on the ground, that as you go, in one case, to kiss the person hello, the dog wants to bite your face. Now, I don't blame the dog. The dog's in the person's arms, and another huge human face comes zooming in to kiss the holder of the dog. And other ones that do it when you want to sit down next to the person or what have you. What about the difference between that and dogs who have aggressive issues towards other dogs? Which do you think is easier to manage, since that same thing you were talking about, the tight leash, the anxiety from the human, often sets up dogs to be way tense and give all kinds of wrong signals to other dogs? Which of those two things do you think is sort of easier to suss out,
Right,
easier to manage?
I'm going to break it up. The dog aggression is much harder on the dog to deal with.
Interesting.
And the possessive aggression is much harder on the possessed by dog individual.
Interesting.
We're talking about, it's sometimes easy for a person to go and say, I'm going to change this dog. I've had it. I'm done. I'm going to make the dog change. I know that, I've got a couple years on me. It's really hard for me to change things for myself.
Right.
So it's always easier to make someone else around you change or make the dog change and push blame. But when you have to change your behavior as the owner, you have to be, it's just like anything else. If you're not ready for help and you're not ready to acknowledge, you're not going to get anywhere. And
that's a really good point, whether that's rehab or quit smoking or whatever.
Right.
That's a great point. And you think
if you're not ready, you're not ready. And
nice.
I can tell you, I've been to homes where by the second time there, I can tell a dog within 5 minutes what they're about. Every once in a while you find a dog that holds a card on you, but most of them, you're reading them just as they're reading you. They're very good evaluators of people. And when you tell what that dog is about, you kind of get an idea of what your program's going to be. People like to hide what they're about when you walk in and you're dealing with an aggression dog. People don't want to tell you about every bite incident that led up to it.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Allison said she's actually worked with dogs and then sometimes passed them along to you, where the dog has bitten her big time, and the people didn't tell her that dog's already bitten people significantly. I mean, that's really very bad information to hold back from a trainer.
Well, the other thing is, when we were talking before about limiting options and behaviors, when a behavior presents itself in any fashion and it is not reinforced through positive or negative, it will self-extinguish. And when a dog acts...
Explain that a little further. I love it, but explain it a little further, please.
If a dog goes into barking,
okay,
and let's just use nuisance barking, where you're sitting on the couch, you're enjoying reading a book, and dog barks at you. First thing everyone does, that's form manipulation. Person looks, that has now been reinforced.
Just by looking.
Even if you look and give a kind of look of displeasure with the dog, it's a negative reinforcement. It still worked for something.
Okay.
If you ignore that behavior and nothing happens, then we go into, okay, if the dog stops barking, what would be the dog's next move? Okay, maybe to grab you by the foot, maybe to grab one of your prized possessions and run around the room with it.
Yep.
We're back to that limitation of options thing, and when we nail down an aggressive dog and the dog barks and barks and barks, and somehow the person being barked at has that reaction, the look of concern. Whoa, the dog's starting to build themselves up a little bit and feel like, you know what? I'm a little tougher than I thought I was.
This is working for me.
Yeah, it works for me. I like the way I can feel stronger and make this human move away from me. And then when we get into bites, when a dog bites a human, gets away with it, and when I say get away with it, all reinforcement time for dogs, 0.84 seconds, positive or negative, 0.84 seconds. If you don't have some type of reaction to it,
a plan. In other words, a plan in place. If that dog were to even attempt to bite, your plan is to do
immediate.
X.
When I walk into a home with an aggressive dog, I tend not to trust. I tend not to trust the owner to handle their own dog, as far as the leash goes, because I've been around experienced handlers and I watched handlers feed the dog to the helper, and by that I mean like let the line go, and someone's not ready, timing's off, and dog bites someone with an experienced handler on their leash. So if I'm going to get bit, I'm going to let it be my own fault.
Okay.
And
So what do you
another
tell people? You're going to, and they've called you, we have an aggressive dog, and you say, okay, how are you going to manage the dog before I open the door? Do you talk to them about that?
I tell them on the phone they're going to have the dog on leash before I come in the home, leash in hand, draped down to the floor with their foot on it. At least that way I know the dog would have to take them off their feet to get to me.
Okay.
And another little thing about possession aggression in those situations when you're doing an entry, I usually hand them my leash, put my leash and maybe a slip collar on them, and a lot of these dogs that put the display on, they bark and they're used to backing someone up. As soon as I pull the dog toward me, it's a different game. It's not the rules they usually play by, and they kind of go into flight reaction. They want to get away from you then. They're like, wait a minute, this isn't the way this usually works. They usually back you up.
Right, because a lot of this is from fear and wanting to drive you away.
Right. And when you do get that one dog that wants to come at you once you've pulled him, that's why you have the owner with the foot on the leash, though, because at least that way we know, all right, well, we're going to handle this different. You're going to get tied out to a tree while we work. You're not going to be able to get to me, have another bite experience, and reinforce the idea that biting someone makes them go away.
Okay, let's say you have that perfect timing of the reaction to the bite. What would that perfect timing be? Not that we want people to have dogs in their environment that can actually practice biting, but what is the perfect reaction to? Is there a perfect reaction to it, to extinguish it? Even with the Yorkie who's sitting next to the sun, you see this on the Caesar show all the time. They love to re-show this stuff, and I'm not really down with his explanation of what's happening or his solution.
Yeah.
But what should happen? Should the person that's being resource guarded as the precious person pick that dog up and put it on the floor, or give it a timeout, or
the timeout doesn't work.
No, I didn't think so.
Yeah, the thing about timeout is, again, back to that 0.84 second reinforcement time. The dog has no relation to the act.
Right.
It's a good thing to do for everyone to cool down. That's not a bad thing. And I find a lot of clients don't have the reaction time, and it's a learned skill. Like you said, you read a lot of different books about dog training. Dog training is a definite mechanical skill. It's not. And another thing, one of my trainers told me, don't tell me, show me. And if you're not in there, hands-on with the dog, you could talk about it all day, and it's not going to change things. So when we talk about that same situation where the dog is owning an object or the person. If the person's timing is off and they're frustrated, I'd rather see the dog go away. Everyone collect themselves. The dog not sense some level of stress coming from the owner, because that's just refueling the dog's situation. That's adding fuel to the fire. And we all want a calm, assertive person to be in leadership position with all of us. And if you had someone who was hysterically yelling, you wouldn't look to them as like, hey, you know what, let me ask them for
directions,
let me ask them for advice. They're always calm and collected about things. They give the best advice.
Right.
So what I look to do there is really, when I had to use a timeout, let's say, it's not to teach a dog anything. It's to separate everyone out and then reapproach the problem again. But an immediate correction is one of those things where, viewers at home, listeners at home, please consult with a professional trainer. There are lots of methods out there, and I could talk to you about 20 different ways to approach it. And every situation, every owner, every dog, every environment is going to call for a different tool. And I'm very multi-method. I'm not stuck in one way of doing things. I do what works. That said, I do not go by what the client insists we use as a tool, because if I did that, they wouldn't need me. And usually you got to turn off emotion when you're dealing with aggression. You got to realize that it's going to be either you go at it and you seek to resolve the situation, or that dog's going to move along. And I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of people coming to me looking for an aggressive dog these days.
Well, that's curious you should say that, because I would think if anybody does have someone asking them, they'd be asking you. Because you few trainers that breed and train dogs for police and military, it's not aggressive in that sense. It's more like motivated and assertive. You're not actually breeding for aggression or teaching a dog to be aggressive. But in the olden days, and I don't know what they call it nowadays, people used to, I remember in New York, you'd drive out to the country and there'd be a dog training place, canine units, selling you a protection dog. It'll take down anyone that tries to get on your property or in your house. I mean, I guess that's politically incorrect, but there are still people wanting those kind of dogs, right?